Jeremiah was a prophet of the Almighty. Jeremiah have a whole book in the Bible dedicated to the work of Jeremiah. It's conventionally dated to 650. In 587 BCE, the first temple had been destroyed, and the Jews had been taken into exile. And Jeremiah lived through that era. And Jeremiah, the period of Jeremiah spanned 5 kings of Judah: Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah. Also the prophet Huldah. She was a relative and a contemporary of Jeremiah. Well, the prophet Zephaniah had been his teacher. Esther is dated according to Seder Olam to the 350s BCE. Did not introduce the Persians to monotheism. It existed in some form from shortly beforehand, and of course the message of the prophets. It was not the only religious belief extant at that time. Other pagan notions existed, and these were to merge with that of the Hebrew prophets, create Zoroastrianism as we know it today. Nevertheless, the Sanhedrin is to be thanked for bringing this issue to public attention. Jeremiah was the son of Hilkiah, a Cohen priest from the land of Benjamin in the village of Anatot. Why we mention Jeremiah is because another tradition, a tradition from the Persians themselves, a much more ancient tradition, says that Jeremiah, or an emissary of Jeremiah, were responsible for founding Zoroastrianism. And that is where we are going with. And Jeremiah is from the land of Benjamin. He was a priest, a Kohen. He preached and he prophesied concerning the future. He predicted the destruction of Jerusalem. This happened, and most of the Jews were taken to Babylon. A small group rebelled and later fled to Egypt, forcing Jeremiah to come with them. Baruch, the scribe of Jeremiah, also went with him, along with the daughters of the deposed king of Judah. What happened after that we do not know. Different legends trace Jeremiah to Ireland or to Persia. But at all events, putting everything together may be certain that emissaries from Jeremiah acting in his spirit did reach Persia at around this time. Meanwhile, the 10 tribes have been exiled. Some of them have been taken to Media and to areas of Persia. From there, they later moved elsewhere. In danger in learning about non-Hebraic religions, we are warned not to go too deeply into what other peoples believe, but only to cling to the scriptures, to learn the scriptures, and not to go worrying about how other people worship their gods. See, Deuteronomy 12:30, it says, "Take heed to yourself that you do not be snared by following them, after they be destroyed from before you, and that you inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? Even so I will do likewise." But nevertheless, we have to know something. So this is pertinent in our case. The founder of Zoroastrianism was called Zoroaster in Greek and Zarathustra in Persian. And he was a Hebrew from the Lost Ten Tribes, or he had been taught by Hebrews from the Lost Ten Tribes. He first appeared in the east from the region of Hara, present-day Afghanistan, and Bactria, the area of Bactria. His original doctrine was monotheistic and even biblical in character. Zarathustra, the teaching of Zarathustra, according to the Gathas, the oldest texts amongst the books of the Persian religion. Originally, his doctrine was monotheistic, biblical. After his death, his religion was paganized by the Magi. The Magi were the priestly tribe of the Medes that first were co-rulers with the Persians. But nevertheless, the original message had been Hebraic. Zoroaster was, according to Iranian Persian tradition, was taught by the prophet Jeremiah, but one of Jeremiah's pupils. Zoroaster himself has Scythian family connections, and some reports identify him as an Israelite. There were Israelites among the Scythians, so both versions may be correct. Presently, we have a religion known as the Parsis in Iran and in India, and they follow a version of the Zoroastrianism as it was at a later date, not as it was much earlier. There are 4 stages described by Nathan's Ninian Smart concerning the stages of development into Zoroastrianism. It was the religion of Zoroaster himself, the religion of the Persian Achaemenid monarchs, Cyrus and Darius, who introduced elements that comprised the original monotheistic character. But this is not exactly correct. These people, Cyrus and Darius, they make declarations in the name of their gods, in the name of pagan gods. Their attitude seems to be that they identify that the chief god of any place they are in, that is the Lord God. That is the God we recognize as God. And this would be acceptable for non-Israelites. And so we should be careful how we relate to these opinions. And we also had, we had the origin of Zarathustra himself. We had the Persian Achaemenid monarchs, Cyrus and Darius, which were quite similar, but that allegedly introduced other elements. They made the Essenes, the Parthians and Sasanian dynasties. The Parthians were more or less indifferent religiously. They sometimes inclined towards Judaism. They became Jews in some cases, or they became Christians, or they followed other religions. No, they're not homogeneous whole. Parthians were followed by the Sassanians, who ruled 211 CE to 641 CE. Sassanians were ardent Zoroastrians in its later form. And under the Sasanians, Zoroastrianism was revived and regulated and received the form we now know it by. The Zoroastrian scriptures are known as the Avesta. The earlier section of the Avesta is known as the Gathas, Gathas. Part of the Gathas are attributed to Zarathustra himself, and from these original beliefs of Zarathustra may be reconstructed. The impression is Zarathustra was a monotheist. He denounced other gods as devils. He emphasized opposition to the personification of evil or the Satan. He believed in angels. His religion has been described as resting on 4 main points. Worship Ahura Mazda, that is God Almighty. Magnify the archangels. Damn the demons. And marry your nearest relative, which could be a later Iranian insertion, or it may not. Zarathustra lived from between 630 to 550 BCE. And he lived not long after the lost 10 tribes had been exiled to the area he lived in. Whilst Judah still existed as a state, in the Judah there reigned King Josiah, according to conventional dates. Jeremiah was also called evil. He existed at the same time as King Josiah. And Jeremiah was sent by the king. According to the Talmud says that Jeremiah was sent by the king to the lost 10 tribes. So Zarathustra, according to the Talmud, was sent by the king to the lost 10 tribes. The lost 10 tribes were in that area of northern Iran. And in that area of northern Iran appears at that time the religion of Zarathustra. Jeremiah had also family connections to the Scythians, whom other evidence identifies being in part identical with the lost 10 tribes. The original doctrine of Zarathustra was similar to that of the Bible, and some of his expressions are similar to those found in the book of Isaiah. Salient features of the teachings of Zarathustra are one God, resistance to evil. Satan and devils, other gods, demons, angels exist, and they are pointed over abstract principles. You have a Ocean, a future Messiah. We have a resurrection of the dead. We have a last judgment. Also, Zarathustra was lived with rages in Madia, the town of Rages in Madia, which was a 10 tribes area and associated with the tribe of Naphtali. This is mentioned in the apocryphal book of Tobit, Tobias. You see a Talmud, a suit is up to a gent, one of the books, the Bibles, usually associated with the Catholic Church, which have additional books, often originally written in Greek, but they've been added on to the Bible. Some of them are quite old. So one of these books is known as Tobias or Tobit. And there he mentions people from the lost tribes, from the tribe of Naphtali, in the region of Rages and of northern Media. And these people are descendants from lost tribes of Israel, which is proof. The lost tribes of Israel were in that area. And this is the area of Zarathustra. And the Bible also mentions Israelites having been exiled to that region. See 1 Chronicles 5:26. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, even the spirit of Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. And he carried them away into exile, namely the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half tribe of Manasseh, and brought them Halak, Habul, Hara, unto the river of Goshen to this day. Hara, otherwise known as Arya, is usually taken to mean Herat in the region of Afghanistan. Also, we had the Essenes, so a Jewish sect by Qumran by the Red Sea, and they were not, as far as we know, in contact with the Persians, but they had teachings of their own, which are similar to those that we find with the Zoroastrians, the earlier Zoroastrians, in contact of the Gathas with biblical passages, especially those in the book of Isaiah, in the biblical book of Isaiah. Subject has been churned over and over again. Every time someone reads passages, they strike them, they come up with the same conclusion, that the early Gathas are similar to the book of Isaiah and seem to be quoting from it. Also, has been pointed out that Nehemiah was one of the early leaders of the Jews when they returned to Sion, when they returned to the area of Jerusalem. And Nehemiah was the cupbearer. He was a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes in Nehemiah 2:1. And Artaxerxes is known as a devout Zoroastrian, and he could not have had a cupbearer from a ritually unclean cup. Nehemiah must have been considered as the same as a Zoroastrian. Otherwise, he could not have held that task. The eyes of Artaxerxes is that Nehemiah, the Israelite, the Jew, must have been considered ritually pure according to the Zoroastrian religion. Darius favored the Jerusalem Cohens, the priests, and we find a scrap of paper, Darius in Egypt from 419 BCE at Elephantine, and Darius orders the Jews of Elephantine to keep the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days, that is to keep Pesach, the Passover. So taking these sources all together, we see proof that originally the Persians had been influenced by Jeremiah, by biblical sources, and later on these may have been strengthened in the time of Esther, or they may not have been. What the influences that already existed may have been sufficient. At all events, this is worth considering, worth noticing, and it may be that in some way or other the Iranians of Persia will come to return to what they once